Hey, what's up guys, it's your man JB here, and in this video I'm going to share with you my top tips for painting a wall. Stay tuned because it's coming right now. Now, the first tip that I'm going to share with you is to take your time with the preparation. Now, I haven't got a huge wall to paint here. I'm literally just going to paint this wall. But even so, the preparation is so important. There is no way I'm just going to get my brush and roller and throw a load of paint on the wall. We need to make sure the wall is ready and suitable to be painted. If you've got gaps along the ceiling line or between the wall and the skirting, then you do need to fill those. You can fill those with a suitable decorator's cork and obviously wait for that to dry. Now, for the purpose of this video, I'm not painting the skirting, but at the same time I still want to make sure it's corked and filled and there's no gaps. For that we're using polyfiller decorator's cork, and the thing I like about this product is it's ready to paint over after an hour. You also want to ensure that you filled any holes. Now, there were a few pictures up on this wall and I've already filled the holes, and not actually that long ago, and I used this Bartolene ready mixed quick dry lightweight filler, and this stuff is fantastic because it dries so quickly. You can almost apply it and paint within, again, 30 or 60 minutes. So I have already filled a couple of the holes. So what we need to do now is to make sure the wall is completely smooth and there's no old bits of paint or bits of dirt that got in the paint before, because sometimes when you fill the wall it does feel quite rough and a few sharp spots. So what we're going to do is take a bit of 80 grit sandpaper and just go over that wall to give it a bit of a sand. As we call it in the trade, keying. So we're going to key the surface. Make sure you mask up for this. You don't want to be breathing in any of that dust. Now, the paint that's on the wall already is a matte finish, which means it's not a very kind of shiny, smooth finish. It does almost have a bit of a rough feel to it, which means when you're painting over it, you can paint over it with very little sanding. However, if you're painting over a wall that has a bit more of a sheen on it, or if you've previously used silk emulsion, it will need a bit more of a sand. You really do need to scratch it up a bit before you apply the new coat. Now, what it's a good idea to do once you've done the sanding is just to give it a bit of a wipe with a damp cloth. We'll also get rid of any cobwebs that are up there. Now, my next tip is to ensure that you've got a decent brush, or a good enough, big enough brush to do the job. The last thing you want to do is start doing all the cutting in with a brush that's too small and not suitable. So I've just picked this brush up from my local hardware store, and this is a Monarch Razorback. I would usually use a Purdy brush when I'm doing any decorating, and if I was doing a whole room, the great thing about a Purdy brush or something similar is they can hold a lot of paint and the cutting in just absolutely flies by. But for the purpose of this video, I've bought a pretty standard paintbrush from the hardware store, as I've already said, and this would be absolutely ideal for somebody at home doing DIY and doing their own painting. This is a 3-inch brush. It's got quite a wide ferrule, which means it will hold a fair amount of paint, and it's also angled, which is perfect for doing the cutting in the corners, because what I don't want to do is get paint on these two walls either side of the wall that I'm painting. And I know from experience that this type of brush is actually going to be pretty good for cutting in. Just bear in mind, if you've got a lot of cutting in, you want a big brush. My next tip, and before we start cutting in, is to make sure that you wet your equipment or prime your brush and your rollers. What we don't want to do is to start dipping our dry brushes and rollers straight in the paint. There are two reasons for this, and the first reason is, of course, if we wet our brush or our roller, it makes it easier to clean at the end of the day because it prevents the paint from drying too quickly on the bristles and on the roller itself. And secondly, it just helps to pick up more paint and it allows you to paint or roll a lot easier. It just comes off the roller or the brush a lot nicer. So generally what I would do with a brush is I would pretty much soak it, so I put it under running water so I really do get the brush completely wet. And what I've done here is just put it in a bucket with some clean water in there, so those bristles really are completely soaked. Now the last thing you want to do is perhaps just squeeze it and then start painting with it because there's a lot of water in there. So this is where we can spin the brush. Now this has got a nice long thin handle, which means I can keep the brush bristles within the bucket and give it a real good spin. Now that is not dry, it's certainly not dry, but there is no water in there at all, no excess water that's going to come off on your wall or in your paint. Similar to the rollers, I'm not going to dip the roller in there, or I guess you could, but then I would take it outside and give it a real good spin. What I do with a roller is just wet my hand and almost kind of dry my hand with the roller. I want to make it damp, that's how I want it. I don't want it dry, I don't want it dripping, because if it is dripping and then you put it in the paint, you start rolling, it will splatter everywhere. So make sure it's damp, not wet. And then the same with the big roller. Great stuff, my equipment is now primed and ready for painting. I'm almost tempted to put some water in with this because it really is gloopy. It is recommended, if the conditions are warm, if you're doing this kind of thing in the summer, about 10% water added to your paint is ideal. But I'm just looking at the consistency of this and thinking I'm going to mix some water in this, I think. Now that this is adequately mixed, I'll put some water in it. It's definitely runnier than what it was, but it's still quite thick. It is quite a thick paint. But this leads me on to my next tip, which is going to be to use one of these. Use a kettle, use a paint kettle. What you don't want to be doing is using this, whether it's half full or full. You're carrying this around and you're dipping your brush in trying to paint. You don't want all this paint in your hand, particularly if you've got a larger 5 litre tub. That's not cool. So really good idea, get yourself a kettle. You can just put a relatively small amount in here and it's not going to be heavy. It's nice and easy to get into. You haven't got this rimmed edge here and just going to make it so much easier and less likely to make a huge mess if you drop it. For best results, I really want my paintbrush to have lots of paint on it. What I don't want to do is just have a little bit of paint on the end of it. I want to make sure the paint really does get all the way into those bristles. The cutting in for this wall is going to be pretty straightforward. I haven't got any plugs to cut in around, just around the 4 sides of the wall. Quite excited about using this brush. So what we'll do, we'll just put a load of paint next to the corner. What you don't want to do is try and cut in straight away. This isn't a massively wide brush. It doesn't hold a huge amount of paint, but I've got a feeling it's going to be quite nice for cutting in. So there we go, really got plenty on that brush now. So what we'll do, we'll just start to bring that brush closer to the edge, like so. Do it in an upward stroke as well. And there, look at that, lovely straight line, lovely bit of cutting in there. Let's get this bit down in the corner. And the reason I went for this angled brush as well is because you'll see actually getting into the corners is a lot easier when the brush is angled. There, look at that. That's lovely. Same on the bottom, we'll put some paint on there. Make sure we've got plenty in the brush. And then we'll just cut that in along that skirting line. There. Fantastic, this brush is quite nice. Now my next tip is what we do once we've done the cutting in with the brush. I don't want to leave it like this because there are brush marks in it or tram lines in it. So I'm going to get my mini roller. I'm going to load that up with some paint. Not too much, I just want to wet it really. And then what we'll do here is just do a little bit more cutting in, or going over the cutting in with the mini roller. You can get quite close to the wall, be careful that you don't hit the wall, but you can get quite close and it just gets rid of any brush marks. So I'm going to do this all the way round once I've done this, so a little bit at a time. I'm not going to do all of this and then come back to this. I'll probably do a metre or so and then go over it with the mini roller. Next up, we're going to roll the walls. Now, you could just use a roller like this. This is a 12-inch roller. This is what I tend to use most of the time. And you could just use this as it is, but do you know what? It's much easier if you get yourself a pole. So if you've got a roller, make sure it's got a screw on the end or a thread on the end, and get yourself a roller pole. Now I can reach the ceiling, as you can see. I don't need an extension as such, but using a pole makes it so much easier. You can use two hands, you can keep it straighter, and it's a lot quicker. Good idea. If you've got lots of painting, get yourself a roller pole. As I've mentioned already, I'm using a 12-inch roller, and this is a medium nap or a medium pile. You don't want anything too short. That just makes it quite difficult to put on the wall, especially if you're using emulsion. And at the same time, you don't want anything that's too long, because that's going to give you quite a rough finish. And usually if you were doing an exterior wall with a masonry paint, then you would use a much thicker pile. But for this job, I've got a medium, as you can see here. And I also had a medium pile on my mini roller. So it's a good idea to try and get your mini roller and your big roller roughly the same, because when I do the rolling with this, I want to be able to blend in to the same texture as with my mini roller. Right, let's load up then and get this wall painted. Takes a little bit of time to get the roller completely soaked in paint. What I wouldn't recommend doing is just putting it deep in the paint and just completely soaking it. Or just kind of dip it in and roll it off. This is quite thick paint, so it's not very runny. But there we go, there's my roller now. Looks pretty good, there's plenty of paint on there. We're going to hit the wall. What we don't want to do here is go really close to the corner, because this is new paint, or I've just loaded it with paint. If I go straight here, I could end up with a rather thick line of paint very close to the edge, and I'm going to have to clean that up. So what we do is start a little bit away from the edge, and I start roughly in the middle, maybe about 2/3 up, come all the way down and then back up again. Now I can tell straight away that there's not enough paint on here, and this is only just getting soaked in paint, so I'll just come down, move it over slightly, so I'm just going over the blank line, or the bit that I missed. Just go up and down a couple of times, and actually that was just the right amount of paint. Now I've gone just over the line where I cut in here and at the bottom, and just over on the side as well. And because I started here, get the paint off, then move it over, it means that I haven't got a thick line of paint. Quite a good tip, that one. There you go, there's another one for you. And the more times I dip my roller into the paint, the better it will become, and the more paint it will hold. So again, what I want to do here, I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap. I'm not going to go right over it. I'm going to get the paint on the wall, and then I'll come up, or just move it over slightly, just to cover over that bit that I missed. And then back over again, and back down. There. I'm going to be doing 2 coats on this wall, and straight away you can see as the paint starts to dry, it definitely does need 2 coats. Usually 2 coats, most paints 2 coats. If you're doing something of a very similar colour to what you're painting over, you can get away with 1, or if you're doing it the same colour and just refreshing it, you could probably just get away with 1. I've done yellow not too long ago, and I think I ended up doing about 4 coats, which was a bit of a pain, so I'm hoping this is just going to be 2, but we'll see how we go. Now you need a good balance here. You don't want to put too much paint on, but then you don't want to put too little on either. And what we're going to do is just roll that up and down in vertical lines, just like so. Now this is looking really smooth already, but what you can do, just to ensure a really smooth finish with a semi-dry, not a lot of paint on your roller, you can just go over it again very lightly, not a lot of pressure. You don't want to be applying pressure to your roller, because you really don't want to bend this either, and you don't want to ruin your roller. But just by gently going over it, you can flatten it even more, but I can tell you already that's looking pretty good. So we're just going to use this same technique just to go all the way along. Now personally, I do start in the middle, as I've already mentioned. However, there are some people who will say start at the bottom, start at the top. It's your own personal preference. The reason why I like to start in the middle is because when your rollers fill up with paint, if you just start here and then come down, you've got lots of paint here and not a lot here. Kind of similar to starting close to the edge. So if we start in the middle, we put a lot in the middle here, it goes thinner, then you pick it up again as you come down, and then it goes thinner on the way down. That's my theory, that's the way I like to do it. Now even if you've got the thickest paint, you will get some splatter, tiny flicker of paint coming off the wall. I mean, I can feel it on my hand, I can see it on my hand, so it is obviously coming off and going onto the floor, onto the dust sheets. So one thing that I do is I often wipe the skirting with a wet cloth. So if it's wet before I start rolling, it's much easier to get that paint off. So again, I'll just go over it very lightly with a kind of almost dry roller, just to give it a little bit of a smoother finish. You can probably hear as the amount of paint on the roller becomes less and less, it becomes a lot quieter. And it's usually at that point where it really starts to smooth out the wall. I have already done that bit, so I'm just going to go back over here. There we go, there's my first coat. Hopefully my first of 2 coats, but we'll see. There's plenty of paint. I've definitely got plenty of paint to do 3 if I need to. My next top tip is how to store your brushes and rollers in between coats, or if you're going to use them again the next day, because what you don't want to be doing is wasting time and making a mess, cleaning everything up. Once you've done one colour or you've done a bit, and then next day you're going to have to do it all over again. So the best thing to do here, and I'll show you to start with the brush, is just get off any excess paint. You don't want to try and get this completely dry, but certainly get any major paint off there. Grab yourself some cling film, and this is what I like to do with the brushes, then just wrap that over a couple of times in the cling film, and that will stay wet for days now. That will certainly be no problem to use again tomorrow. If you make it quite tight around the ferrule, fold it over, perfect, that's sorted. I will do exactly the same with my mini roller. So a little bit of cling film. Sometimes I will take the sleeve off, sometimes I won't. But just wrap it round. There we go. Simple as that. That's ready for the next day. What else have we got? Big roller. So I might use a longer bit of cling film, or what I might do is use a bit of this plastic sheeting that I've got. And I just open this up like so, roller on there, cover it, fold it over, and again, and stick a little bit of masking tape just over that tape to not necessarily keep it airtight, but just to stop it coming off, and that will be absolutely fine for the next day. And then with my scuttle and my kettle, very similar, I will just bit of cling film over the top like that, and I'll often get my cloth, make sure it's damp, and then just use that over the top to hold the cling film down. So quick as you like. That's all ready to go in the next couple of hours or tomorrow. First coat done, and that is dry, ready for the second coat. The steps you took on the first coat are exactly the same for the second coat and even the third coat if you need to. Well, the second coat is done, it's almost dry, and I'm pretty happy that I don't need to put a third coat on there. The final thing to do is clean our equipment, and the last tip that I'm going to share with you is the best way to clean your equipment and get it dry and ready for next time. Any paint that's left in the kettle, again, we can just transfer that back. Now, some people will suggest that you don't put old paint or paint from your kettle back in to a new tub or an unused paint tub, but I say I'm not wasting it. Now, to make cleaning a bit easier, it's a good idea to make sure you've got yourself a tool just like this one, and this is excellent for cleaning your rollers. So what we need to do is to get all the paint off this roller. I tend to do this over the scuttle because it's a much larger area for me to scrape the paint into. Now, I will give my scuttle a rinse out, but as you can see there's a few years of paint on there, so I don't bother cleaning it out properly. I'll just give it a rinse. So we really want to make sure we get all the paint out of this brush. This is really worth taking your time to get everything clean. Now, I'm not worried about getting a bit of paint on the handle here, but I do like to remove as much paint as possible on the ferrule. I tend to use a scourer for this as well. It's a good idea just to use a little bit of washing up liquid on the brush, really helps to get that paint out. And then we can give it a good scrub as well with a scourer. And really just want to keep doing this until the water runs clear. And with the roller, we've just got to keep rinsing it and cleaning it until this comes out clear as well, until the water runs clear. Bit of washing up liquid really helps to get that last bit of paint out. My brushes and rollers are now nice and clean. Last thing to do is spin them. Look at that. Perfect. All ready for next time. I do hope you found this video interesting and giving you the confidence to go ahead and paint your own walls. In the description box below, I'll leave a list of tools and products that I used in this video. If you have any comments about this video or questions you're just dying to ask, then leave those in the comments box below. While you're here, if you haven't done so already, go ahead and subscribe. That'll be fantastic. Right then folks, I've got to get this room back to normal. I'll see you on the next video.